Look here, N-words, if we ain't out of this house in 15 minutes, they're gonna burn it down. This is what the Klansmen told Malcolm X and Jeremiah Shabazz as they sat at the kitchen table of Jeremiah Shabazz, munching on cookies and lemonade provided by Jeremiah Shabazz's wife. What is this odd story? Well,
I know for a fact that there is a conspiracy between the Muslims and the Lincoln Rockwell Nazi and also the Ku Klux Klan. There is a conspiracy.
Well, describe this conspiracy.
Well, the Ku Klux Klan made a deal, or were trying to make a deal with Elijah Muhammad in 1960 in the home of Jeremiah X, the minister in Atlanta at that time, who had president as the minister in Philadelphia. They were trying to make a deal with him to make available to Elijah Muhammad a county, a size tract of land in Georgia or South Carolina, where Elijah Muhammad could then induce Negroes to migrate and make it appear that his program of a segregated state or separated state was feasible.
this is a story pieced together from some FBI informants that were in the Klan, and also Malcolm X himself, and some other internal records from the Nation of Islam. The year was, well, in 1960, a telegram went to the Nation of Islam headquarters suggesting a meeting between some members of the Georgia Atlanta Klan, which was, I think, the Georgia Klan. Alabama was active, but I think Georgia had the most. These Klansmen, which was, might have been United, well, whatever, there's multiple Klan groups, but this was like the biggest one. They proposed a meeting, and now back in the 20s, Marcus Garvey had a meeting with the Klan about, well, we both want the races to be separate, so if black people get their own land, then they can be separate.
The basis of the Nation of Islam's program centers around land to supply basic needs. 3 hours from Chicago in Cassopolis, Michigan, is a typical Muslim farm operation managed by Brother Cornelius X. Williams. His involvement with this farm project goes back to the very beginning.
We started about 3 years ago, shortly after I'd heard teaching in South Bend, and I was interviewed by the messenger, and he was talking about he wanted to get a farm started for the Muslims. And I had several interviews with him, and he explained what he wanted and how he wanted it set up, how he wanted to go about it.
I don't think that the Klan members were quite smart enough to understand that their segregation was different than what the Nation of Islam wanted, was separation. Segregation was convenient for the whites because you have the black people around. They don't get all the same rights, but they're available to work and to, buy stuff, right? They're handy, but they don't get full rights.
As far as the colored people were concerned, I feel that they were a good bit happier than they are now. They had less in the way of material things. But I can remember back in the 20s, when I was a small boy, they were always singing at their work. They had a great sense of humor. And now today, they just don't seem to care much about that as they used to.
Separation, having a separate nation within a nation, which was the Elijah Muhammad's self-described ideal of what the Nation of Islam would be, is different.
National Secretary John Ali.
Well, it is a desire and plan of Mr. Muhammad to make us completely self-sufficient, like other people are. Because the only way you can be independent, you have to be self-sufficient. As he says in good language that we all can understand, we have to take our stomachs out of the white man's kitchen.
What do you think are the differences between the races?
I think there's a refusal to accept responsibility. I think there's a lack of motivation. I've tried here to promote people to foremen, superintendents, but they just refuse to do it. They just don't want the responsibility. They don't worry like the white man. If they have troubles, they go to sleep and wake up the next morning, and that trouble is over.
And so this is one of the significant things about Mr. Muhammad followers. We support ourselves. I mean, in the black community, there are very few or nothing that's supported by the black community, because we have not been trained to support ourselves. We support every other activities of ourselves. But the followers of Mr. Muhammad, we have supported ourselves, and that's why we're able to maintain our own private schools. We have our own farms. We have our own newspaper plant. We have our own...
From farms in Michigan, Alabama, and Georgia, beef is transported by the Muslims' own trucking service, processed in their plant in Chicago, and delivered to be sold in their various stores. Some of the food grown on their farms go to Muslim restaurants like the Salam restaurant in Chicago, which has two parts, an elegant, peaceful dining room and a coffee shop next door.
Nation of Islam at this point is growing, and they're starting to build, and it crescendoed probably in the early 70s. They owned hundreds of businesses around the country. They had a fleet of their own trucks moving around produce that was being grown in Alabama, Georgia, and Michigan and being sold in stores. There was, I think, for a brief time, there was a Nation of Islam plane because they had enough products between the food.
We have our own farms. We have our own newspaper plant. We have our own bakeries and other things because we do these things ourselves.
So anyways, so the year is 1961. Elijah Muhammad tells his two basically most trusted and powerful lieutenants, Malcolm X and Jeremiah Shabazz, who was formerly known as Jeremiah X, who was the minister of the infamous Temple Number 12 that the Philly Black Mafia would later come out of, but this is years before that. This is in 61. So they go. Jeremiah Shabazz lived in Atlanta. Like I said, they invited the Klan over. 10 cars showed up, each with like 4 white men. They pull up out front, and the police pulled up. I talked to the Klansmen, who probably said, no, we're here, we're not gonna do anything or whatever. Police leave, and so several of them come inside, and the opening sentence I said to get your attention, that's when they tell Jeremiah Shabazz and Malcolm X when they first walk in, if we're not, listen you N-words, if we're not. So throughout the whole time talking with Shabazz and Malcolm X, where they're supposed to be having, the meeting is supposed to be about, hey, we all want the races separate, but again, I think the whites, the Klan at least, vision of, they really didn't want the blacks away. They just wanted the blacks under control, which is not the same thing. But the idea was that the Klan, well, they got sidetracked, but I think the general idea was supposed to be from Elijah Muhammad's side, if we tell the Klan we just want to be away from white people and they'll help us, we need them as not necessarily an ally, but we can't really operate in the South. The Klan reactivated in 1954 heavily when the Brown v. Board Education, the school desegregation, the Supreme Court. That's when they really, there's different eras of the Klan. There was the first Klan, the second Klan. The third Klan really reactivated after that. So this is the era 60, 61 when these civil rights workers from the North, including white ones, are being kidnapped and murdered. There was a black man, Judge Aaron Henry. He wasn't a judge, that was just his name. He was slow. He was kidnapped in maybe 61 by the Klan. He was CA straighted. He had, you know what, removed. They removed it and they beat it, but he lived. And the FBI at this point, I mean, FBI had supposedly, they had 2,000 paid informants in various Klan groups. Just like some of the black groups were seen as a threat to the country, the people in Washington, D.C. were not. They may have been racist, but they weren't pro-Klan because, again, these are groups of people not submitting to the law of the U.S. government, doing all this crazy stuff, killing black soldiers, driving through the South on their way back and forth. There was one famous incident in Georgia near Macon. That's why it was always considered so dangerous there. He was driving from Fort Benning back to Washington, D.C., where he lived, and they just pulled up. He didn't even stop anywhere. They just killed him in the car. So the federal government wasn't making the Klan a priority. But, anyways, the Klan CA straighted. Do you know who George Wallace is? George Wallace, not the black comedian. George Wallace, the white Alabama governor who ran on a platform in 1968 and 72 when Nixon won. Segregation now, segregation forever.
I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate that from this cradle of the Confederacy, this very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, that today we sound the drum for freedom, as have our generation of forebears before us done time and again down through history. Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
But he got sniped and put in a wheelchair. Look up George Wallace, segregationist governor of Alabama. He ran in 68 and 72 on the platform that said segregation now, segregation forever. Anyways, the Klan members who grabbed the mentally challenged black guy and did all those horrible things to him, they were caught. In almost all these cases, they didn't have a problem with multiple of the Klan members snitching, turning evidence against the other ones. Because remember, the Klan, a lot of them were police. They were like, at least in parts of the South, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, like they were like regular. They weren't per se criminals. So the feds started coming in and arresting them and forcing the states to arrest them. A lot of these guys would instantly get spooked and want to tell or blame somebody else for what they did. Who knows? So 2 guys, I think, snitched on 4 other Klansmen in that case, and those Klansmen got 20 years in Alabama State Prison. But when George Wallace, and this is why I mentioned him, when he became governor in like 63 or something, like right after that happened, so the guys who snitched got 5 years, and then the other 4 got 20. George Wallace pardoned the 4 that got the 20 years, and the ones who cut a deal and snitched on them, he didn't pardon them. They had to do their 5 years. So talk about sending a message, right? So here you have the governor of the state of Alabama sending a message to, hey, if you're in the Klan and you get caught and you turn state's evidence, the government of Alabama is not harboring any snitches from the Klan, which is pretty, frightening circumstances there in the South at that time period. So this is what's going on around in the Deep South when Malcolm X and Jeremiah Shabazz find themselves at Elijah Muhammad's order sitting in this room and having a conversation with these Klansmen about basically we're going to get land in the South and we don't want any problems from you. But the definitely Malcolm X's intelligence level was kind of, him having a conversation, I'm not too sure about Jeremiah Shabazz, but him having a conversation with these Klansmen was just not, the Klansmen were not at least, I mean, there's extensive notes from the FBI informant and then also from Malcolm X and maybe Jeremiah Shabazz. I'm not, they didn't really seem to get it. Malcolm was holding his tongue and he didn't want to make him, he was saying things to them that was kind of making them seem out of it and dumb, but they didn't even really get it. But so they're kind of going in a circle. They're freely calling them the N-word. Yeah, some of you N-words are good, and sometimes you just need. One told a quick anecdote. One of the white men who owned a business that had black employees. He said, I like my N-word employees. One was coming in late though, so I beat him real good. You don't come in late no more. So, pretty. Well, that was the situation in parts of the South, and that wasn't that long ago to, even have these type of... So they're talking like this to Malcolm X and Jeremiah Shabazz. So this is really the point at which Malcolm X probably psychologically was like, I don't want to be a part of the Nation of Islam anymore. This is not right, because the Klan's agenda, the nation was probably trying to feel them out to, like, we're going to be buying farmland in the South. We ain't trying to be around the white people. We promote your idea of racial separation, and, they even had a little, they had a thing where Malcolm X was sarcastically asking for, he said, well, basically, we can get some white robes too. And the Klan was like, well, we can't have N-words wearing white robes. We can get you some purple robes. And they go back and forth, and then they finally tell Malcolm X, well, we'll drop some purple robes off here at Jeremiah Shabazz's house. So it sounds like the Klan members are kind of, probably they probably never had a conversation with the black person. So, one that was, I'm sure they had plenty of conversations, but they were all parameterized by potential violence and fear, so they weren't real conversations.
Things that we hear about today. And there were nearly 100 enormous rice plantation with many animals around and a beautiful old house and about 100 colored people there. But we loved them, they were our friends. And then it's no disgrace to say they're like children. When we say that, it's because they are like happy children, some of them. Because they like to sit in the sun and rather than work hard. And they'd rather play than work.
If you could, would you paint a picture for us of what it was like on the plantation in your early days?
It was a lovely, happy time living in open spaces with many lovely colored people and animals and flowers and fields.
So their ability to even conceptualize what Malcolm X and Jeremiah Shabazz were probably thinking was pretty low. So where Malcolm X gets super disturbed is when the Klan starts asking about Martin Luther King. Now, Martin Luther King had moved to Montgomery in Alabama at 54. Remember, it's a 61. At this point, Dr. King's already a big deal. The Rosa Parks bus boycott had already happened in the late 50s. King got famous, very famous with that. The Montgomery, or the Selma, where they crossed the bridge and the Alabama troopers were beating old ladies in the head. All these things had already kind of happened. King was someone they wanted to kill. King's house had been bombed, I think, back in the 50s. This is 1961. I don't know, had they blown up? They blew up that church where they killed the 4 little girls. I don't know if that had happened yet when this meeting was going on or is about to happen. But point being, this Klan was not the goofy, losers of today playing dress up in the woods. These guys were, like I said, many were police, and some of them were frightening, clearly killers when you see them interviewed, that they you'd be like, oh no, they'll kill somebody for sure. And they were killing people. So they start asking about Martin Luther King. Now, King at this point, like I said, so there had been attempts on his life. He was a very high-profile person already. He's traveling. He's staying here. He's staying there. He's moving around with groups of people with him, at least volunteers, possibly armed guards.
We are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. That there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance.
Reverend Martin Luther King preaches a doctrine of non-violent insistence upon the rights of the American Negro. What is your attitude toward this philosophy?
The white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King.
Perhaps the FBI is providing him, it's really not known, but he may, probably the Deacons for Defense, they may have provided him with armed guards. As a quick aside, you don't hear about it talked about too much, but of course in the South, all during the whole time of ever, there were shootouts between groups of blacks and whites. There were white people killed. There were vigilante groups of blacks. There were pitched battles fought. I mean, not all the time, but that stuff went on. It wasn't just a pure reign of terror from the Klan and the other whites. There was some type of balance. It's never been killing without killing, to quote Jeff Ford. So it's a ominous conversation. There are people being killed. These people in this meeting, these Klan members may well have killed people or certainly are down with it. And they want to know what the Nation of Islam knows about King's whereabouts and movements. And so Malcolm X, well, now this is when he realizes what. So the Klan is very upset at Dr. King. They want to kill King. They think of the Nation of Islam as probably kind of like maybe some type of clowns that they can use. That's why they have a meeting with them, because they're trying to get them to give info on where Martin Luther King is. And Malcolm X says, well, we may have our differences with him, but we're certainly not, don't want anything violent, or, we would never do anything violent to him. And the Klan, again, not really getting it. It's not that Malcolm X is saying they wouldn't do something violent to Dr. King. He means, like, we may have differences with Dr. King, but we wouldn't want, like, he's not our enemy. But the Klan says, don't just let us know, like, where he's at. We'll handle the violence. So I think probably Malcolm X, this is when he probably mentally started to check out during this. And so meeting kind of ends after that, as it gets very ominous, talking about Dr. King, the whole farmland thing. But there is a little bit of a relationship, and a Nation of Islam being perceived as just really being, well, what they said they were, a nation within a nation. If you join the Nation of Islam, then you separated from society. It really wasn't a group that was for, the rights of all black people. It was if you were a member. And they wanted to be separate. And the Klan thought they could be, maybe just didn't think of them as much of a threat. And during the 60s, Nation of Islam, perhaps if they hadn't have made this entree to the Klan, who knows, they did buy pretty extensive farmland, millions of dollars in today's money worth of farmland, which then many Nation of Islam members went to and produced crops, produced beef. Now, It was different in different places. There was some farms in Georgia that did well, but around 1970, they sold in Alabama because somebody, the local whites, were sniping. They had the Nation of Islam had like a real expensive, they spent a bunch of money buying expensive cows like Angus beef and Hereford from England, like the high-end cows. And they were sniping an expensive cow, I don't know, back inflation adjusted as thousands of dollars each. I'm sure to even buy, and then you spend money to, feed them and all that. They sniped and poisoned a bunch of cows, like dozens of cows, and they had to get out of there. So it was a mixed bag. The Republic of New Africa also did some farming down there, but that's another story. So it wasn't long after this that the stuff we heard about that we, traditionally has said why Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam, the Elijah Muhammad having the children with the secretaries, JFK gets knocked off, and Malcolm X makes statements he's not supposed to, and then he's dead by a vast conspiracy of the Nation of Islam and the police and the FBI. Malcolm X had become kind of a problem for everybody, which is never good when you're a thorn in everybody's side. They're going to get you out of there, which is what ended up happening to Malcolm X. But the Nation of Islam really, after Malcolm X's death, I mean, it got a little bigger, business-wise. I don't know if I think it consolidated what it had. Its business stuff grew. In 1975, when what the Nation of Islam is now was restarted by Louis Farrakhan. So the Nation of Islam of Elijah Muhammad from 34 to 75 when he died. When he died at 75, they had 80 million in assets, which is like, it's like $500 million. I think it'd be about probably 7 to 1 or so, 8 to 1. It's over $500 million, 600 million in assets. There was hundreds of businesses. The Final Call was very profitable and valuable. They had a bank. There was a bank, a guarantee and trust that had 10 million in deposits. Again, that's like $70, $80 million. They had their own little nation within a nation. Very strong in Chicago, Detroit, Philly, maybe some neighborhoods in New York, Harlem, L.A. I think those were the strongest cities, but of course Chicago, because the headquarters was there, and Detroit was right there. Newark was strong. And immediately upon Elijah Muhammad's death, there was a lot of there was the murders in Newark where the people had their heads chopped off and set with their heads facing the east. And there was murders in prison, and there was all this crazy stuff, which is its own story, which is interesting. And of course, Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace, kind of disbanded it in effect because he went Sunni Muslim, and then he started up their own thing, and that's Sunni Muslim is different than what the religion of the Nation of Islam 1934 to 1975 was. And then Farrakhan, who had been prominent leader starting in the late 60s, kind of groomed to take the place of Malcolm X. He basically restarts it kind of from scratch. I'm not sure what happened. I think that all those big assets that were held, well, that would be interesting to know the paper trail of all those assets, because that was a lot of money adjusted for inflation, $500 million. If it just passed into the hand, well, it wouldn't have just passed into the hands of his son, because it was a religious institution. I don't know. Interesting. Today, the Nation of Islam has been combined with the Church of Scientology, if you didn't know. If you enter the Nation of Islam, you take like a Scientology Dianetics exam. The Church of Scientology has given the nation some land. The Church of Scientology is so huge and wealthy, people just don't know. So they've adopted in or co-opted in the Nation of Islam to some extent. You can read about that on your own at your homework. I know that that's happening. I'm not an expert on it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that is going on to some extent. So read about that. Seems like the Nation of Islam has kind of dwindled to the figure of Louis Farrakhan himself being someone that still has a impact. Well, at least, I don't know, does he even speak anymore in the last couple of years? He might be at the end age-wise. But up until recently, I mean, he was a pretty still prominent voice, and I remember seeing a round table of who was supposed to be like all the black political elite. It was everybody from Cornel West to, I don't know, some black senators, and Farrakhan was there. And as far as just seeming the most, I don't know, controlling the conversation and seeming to understand things on the highest level, it seemed like it was more so Farrakhan than anybody else, more than Cornel West, who I think gets caught up in trying to sound smart. I mean, he is very smart, but he may be a little, well, might be too Christian, which obviously Farrakhan is not. But so there you go. There's your tale of the Klan and the Nation of Islam meeting up in Atlanta. And it was a dark experience for Malcolm X, and it probably led to his break. It probably was the first thing that got the ball rolling. Al Prophet, history lesson.